Welcome everyone to the Campus Pride Spotlight Series. My name is Ayla Azim, my pronouns are she and her, and I'm an intern with Campus Pride. For those who don't know, Campus Pride is a leading national nonprofit that empowers student groups and student leaders working to create equitable LGBTQ+ college environments for students. You can learn more at campuspride.org. Today I'll be interviewing the University of Washington for the Campus Pride Spotlight Series. This series is all about what campuses offer today's LGBTQ+ students, our diverse genders and sexuality spectrum. We will highlight colleges and universities that are providing LGBTQ+ inclusivity on their campuses and learn more about their programs and services. I want to introduce to you the representatives from the University of Washington now. Thank you so much for meeting with Campus Pride for the Spotlight Series. Welcome. Please introduce yourself. Please share with us your name, your role on campus, and your pronouns.
Hi, everyone. I'm Val Schweigert. I use she and they pronouns, and I'm the Associate Director of the University of Washington Q Center.
Hi, y'all. I'm Jace Reyes. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a senior in the sociology major at the UW, as well as the Outreach Coordinator.
Thank you both for introductions. It's wonderful to have you all here today. You have a 5 out of 5 star rating on the Campus Pride Index at campusprideindex.org, and you've been ranked among the best of the best in terms of LGBTQ+ friendly colleges and university campuses, so congratulations. To start out, tell us what are some things that are on your campus for LGBTQ+ life, and specifically, what does your campus do for LGBTQ+ students that creates an inclusive space?
I would love for Jace to kind of start out because he has the student perspective down.
Yeah, there's actually genuinely a lot of things on campus for queer students, specifically having to do with the diverse communities of queer students on campus. Obviously, we have the physical Q Center space, which is located in the very center of the campus. Pre-COVID times, it used to be a place for queer and trans students to just hang out and decompress in between classes. It very much was a home away from home. Other than that, there's a lot of very queer and diverse clubs. We call them RSOs on our campus, and affinity spaces for both staff and students. It's pretty cool. A couple of the queer student RSOs include Gal Pals, which is a queer woman and non-binary person RSO, Delta Lambda Phi, which is a fraternity for queer and trans men and non-binary people, which I am actually a part of. But that's some of it. Val, would you like to share a little bit as well?
Yeah, I can get into a little bit of institutional advocacy and things that we offer our students through the Q Center. We work a lot with housing and food services, and particularly Res Life, to have residence halls that are gender inclusive and feel like a safer environment for queer and trans students. And particularly, we have gender inclusive housing options available for students. So as they're matriculating into the university, they can kind of self-select. And then there's a matching process to get students to have roommates and housing that feels really affirming and feels safe for them within on-campus housing, which is great. We also have a lot of queer student leaders, and that can be found both in RSOs, as Jace mentioned, but in our student government, which is called ASU-Dub, Associated Students of the University of Washington. There are subcommissions, and so one of them is the Queer Student Commission, and there's a director that is a student leader there, and they put on programming and partner with the Q Center and other entities across campus, and also provide student-centered advocacy and push the institution at large to change policies and really meet the needs of students in real time. And there's also QPOCA, which is the Queer People of Color Alliance. That's specifically for QD BIPOC students, which is a great affinity space and for folks to find community along not only sexuality and gender lines, but also have a space to talk about racial identity, ethnic identity, cultural backgrounds. And I think something that's really great about our campus that makes it really inclusive is at every level, there's pronoun normalization and usage. And so it's not just like the Q Center and like our students and our staff that like makes pronouns a priority and like is very explicit about using pronouns, but faculty and staff, whether or not they identify on the sexuality and gender spectrum, use pronouns and kind of creating that sense of normalcy and pushing also for our tech needs, especially in this remote operation time with COVID, to put names and pronouns in like our Zoom names and things like that. So anytime a student enters like a virtual space, they should be able to see someone that's reflecting that to them. And then like, yeah, so many classes that are kind of queer centric or queer coded. CHID, the comparative history of ideas, we partner with and are creating kind of courses through the Q Center that are cross designated. Next quarter, we're offering a queering anarchism class, which is great. And also GWiz, that entire department, sociology, anthropology, and American ethnic studies have so many classes that talk about the intersections of queer identity, gender identity, decolonial practice, understanding that in so many different ways. Yeah, so there's just a lot that the campus itself provides and the university provides, as well as how we work as a unit on this campus to uplift those offerings.
Really good answers. Really cool. I really like the gender inclusive housing and all the classes that are offered. That's really cool. So what example can you both share that signifies the importance of having a space on campus for an LGBTQ plus student?
I can start with this one. As someone who has gone to University of Washington for the past 4 years and am honestly very nostalgic as I go towards like the very end of my senior year at this school. One of the things that I love the most about campus is having a sort of like very interconnected queer community. And that's just one of the things that makes me feel more connected to campus and makes me feel more connected to other people on campus. Because it feels like every queer person I know on campus, they might not know each other, but they'll know someone who knows someone. So like that line will go through campus, and you'll be talking to someone and you'll mention someone, and they'll be like, "Oh my God, I know him," and so it's just an instant connection. This obviously has a lot to do with a lot of the queer RSOs and clubs that we have on campus, as well as just like the events that we have. I just think that's a really important thing to make sure that queer students, and something I'm realizing a lot right now, that queer students don't feel isolated in their experiences, because no matter how like unique their experience might be, they will know, like someone will know someone who will have a very similar experience to them that they can connect.
Yeah, and going off of that and the image that was just shared, something that I'm really proud of, this actually happened before I was in the role of associate director, but I've been working with the Q Center for a few years now, and I actually was introduced to the Q Center as a graduate student and became a graduate student employee through the center. And something that I helped co-lead and facilitate was a Cutie BIPOC camping trip. And so it was a nice like intergenerational, multi-generational collaboration between myself as a grad student and an undergraduate student who was really interested in getting specifically Cutie BIPOC folks, queer and trans, Black, Indigenous people of color, to use public lands and use the natural environment around us. We're situated in Seattle in Washington State. It's beautiful and gorgeous when it's not raining. And so getting us out into these spaces and building community while also exploring our resiliency and thinking of nature as another healing practice and pathway. So we took a bunch of students on a camping trip, and that was a really great space just to be with one another and share our experiences, and also kind of like process different things that we had encountered in our lived experience as BIPOC folks, Cutie BIPOC folks, in predominantly white spaces, and also get us off campus and re-relate to one another in ways that aren't just specific to the campus culture, the campus itself, those buildings, those facilities. So that was a really great experience. And I think that was a really important space for so many students, particularly Cutie BIPOC students that don't often see themselves or feel super affirmed in a lot of spaces on campuses, or feel smaller in some ways on large scale campuses.
That is so cool. I love that. That's actually really cool. So may you both please tell more about your campus's LGBTQ plus inclusive policies, and how do students on campus feel about such policies?
Yeah, I can get into some of the policies, and then I think Jace might have more to illuminate about like feedback from the student perspective. But some of our queer and trans inclusive policies and policies on campus, and things that the Q Center leadership and student body has often advocated for and continues to do so, has been around like name change and pronoun recognition, and having students, faculty, staff, any campus community member being recognized as their full and authentic self. And so a lot of that has looked like our net IDs, which is the student identifier. It's often what our university emails are used as, but that translates also into how now folks are recognized on Canvas, which is the classroom like module forum, as well as Zoom, because we're working very remotely, making sure that that system is in alignment and that there's options within that system for students and staff and faculty to self-select and self-identify. So not just having legal names presented, but being able to go in and make it as streamlined and accessible of a process to change folks' names to affirming names, and make visible people's pronouns, so there doesn't have to be that extra, not only a barrier, but also an extra layer of kind of scrutiny and asking folks to provide that. Just having people be able to go in there and change that for themselves if that's something that they want to do and make known. And then another policy is working to increase and build awareness around gender inclusive housing and restroom facilities. So not only expanding what we currently offer through Res Life with housing options on campus, but pairing and finding resources beyond campus and off campus for students to like create intentional housing together. Folks don't always want to live on campus, don't always want to live in the dorms, but creating systems and pathways for them through their connections at the Q Center and the ways that we can advocate for them to find affirming housing wherever they are in Seattle. And then also with bathrooms, just expanding the offerings that we have and making that visible and accessible, like on our website, and making the interactive map widely known for folks so they know where gender inclusive bathrooms are, or where those facilities can be found. And then another one is similarly like gender inclusive locker rooms at the IMA, and expanding even like our idea of gendered athletics. So doing some advocacy at the institutional level of pushing athletics departments and things like that, and those spaces to have gender inclusive spaces for queer and trans students to be able to change and feel safe and feel comfortable, but still meet their like body needs and do what feels good for them and get some movement in and things like that. And some other kind of outside of the facilities aspect of it, but also creating or supporting student organizations and student leaders to create like recreational opportunities for folks to gather and do different types of sports when normally they would feel like it's a barrier to access them, because it's like, oh, this is like the women's intramural team or the men's intramural team, and things are very binarily gendered. And so developing like trans and gender nonconforming swim times and things like that. And then like general like reproductive justice type of initiatives as well. Safer sex supplies, making them super accessible. Also like deconstructing and removing any binary gendered language from that and being like, these are all the supplies we have to offer. Whatever body you have, like please use something that makes your sex and relationships and intimacy safer for you. And also like thinking about what does it mean to cater to anybody that bleeds. And so something that we're moving into is providing menstruation products widely, and disrupting like narratives and myths around like whose bodies actually perform that. So that's a little bit about what we have happening, but Jace can provide feedback on what the students have received and what their feedback is about it.
Yeah, thank you, Val. One thing I also wanted to mention about like the policies and offerings that our school has is that the Hall Health, which is the campus clinic, I guess. I've been talking to a couple of students lately after me and Val met to talk through these questions. But there is a couple of doctors and nurses at the school that do provide like hormone replacement therapy, and will prescribe things like testosterone and estrogen for students. And the pharmacy within the school will like let students pick up their prescriptions from there as well, which is something I think is very important. And when I was like asking about it on our community Discord, students were just over the moon, talking like bumping the names of certain like doctors that they liked interacting with, talking about how easy the process was for them, that sort of thing. It was just really happy. It just made me very happy to see, because like HRT and like hormone replacement therapy for students who choose to transition physically, will definitely let them be able to show up on campus authentically, and show up in spaces like confidently. So I was really happy to see that. There's definitely been a lot of feedback on like the policies that the school has. Obviously, like during a current Zoom age, like Val was talking about, it's more important than ever for like our names to reflect us, who we are, because that's most of what people see. So like actually today on the Q Center email, I was answering a question with a student who was asking like, how do I am I able to change my name within the school system without getting it legally changed? And one of our like grad student educators gave me a resource that literally went through like the step-by-step process of how to do that in order to make it as accessible as possible. Obviously, as Val was talking about earlier, there is a lot of student advocacy around these issues. I know for a fact that like very early on during like the COVID era of like early Zoom, there was like a point where people could change their names on Zoom, and then they were not able to change their names on Zoom, and we got a lot of messages at that point being like saying, hey, is there a way for us to get this back? And a lot of students would provide like input of like life hacks of how to change it in the meanwhile by adding it to their like personal Zoom name. It was very cool to see the community really showing up and helping each other out while the school was figuring out stuff itself. And we've also had, Val, I don't know much about the student protests and the student advocacy that has gone on campus. Could you speak a little bit of that? Sorry.
Yeah, this actually happened when I was a graduate student. There were some like graduate student strikes a couple of years ago, and protests around and organizing around, one, like the Graduate Student Union for academic employees, and part of that was demands being issued to enhance the benefits offered to graduate students, and part of that was trans inclusive and trans affirming healthcare coverage, and also changing the language around like paternal and maternity leave or family leave, changing it to more gender neutral terms to make it more expansive and more inclusive of folks, and also to like dispel the ambiguity of like graduate students that were like, I do want to take off time because my partner is sick, but like my partner doesn't count, or I don't have a biological child, but I'm caring for a partner's child or some other child. And like, I don't see myself counting in this, and like, I need that to be like in written policy documentation. And so a lot of grad students in that strike process, when they issued a lot of demands also for increased pay and things like that, included trans affirming healthcare and other benefits as part of that. And I think also some other stuff that has happened when under the Betsy DeVos, like Department of Education Administration was changing things around Title IX, and there was an open comment period. There were several graduate students that took part in like town halls and open forums that the university was having with our Title IX office, and saying that like the institution needs to take a public stance on changing the definition of like sex-based violence and changing it to be more gender affirming and gender inclusive to gender-based violence, because we know that students are experiencing gender-based discrimination, and writing it down as sex-based means that there's so many things that go unreported, or things that are reported are not investigated. And so I really appreciated the graduate students at this campus in particular identifying that and providing advocacy and activism around that.
Really comprehensive answers. So in both of your opinions, why does our campus feel the need to provide spaces and resources for LGBTQ plus students?
Me and Val loved this question because our initial answer when we were going through the questions together was just, we go here. And we are very that's very much the center of why we feel the need to advocate for rights for queer students, queer and trans students at every level of the university, because queer and trans people exist at every level of the university, including higher administration, professors, students, potential students, things like that. And we just want to make sure that the campus is as good as possible and as accessible as possible and as celebratory as possible of queer and trans students, in order to make them feel like this campus is their home.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add to that. We go here, the intersections of being an employee, a staff, a student on a higher ed campus, a university space, we spend a lot of time in these systems and in these spaces. And if they're not serving us, then we need to figure out why and address those issues. Because we exist and we should live lives that feel affirming, that feel safer, and have we have rights, basically. We have rights and you should recognize them.
And what Val was saying about the fact that if certain rights and certain privileges of queer students on campus aren't being recognized, as we were talking about a little bit earlier about student advocacy, if we see that there is a need that needs to be met, the students on campus are very willing to go to the administration and make these changes happen. So that's a big part of it as well.
Really good answers. So how do LGBTQ plus students get involved on your campus, and do you have active out LGBTQ plus student leaders across campus?
Yeah, I could kind of address that. This is another question that Jace and I were well, we definitely do have out leaders in a lot of ways. And I also, in this process, don't want to out any of our student leaders that may be out to us in our campus community, but aren't out on a national scale or scope, or to their families that don't really know what happens in their world at the university. So I'm not going to name drop anyone other than people that we are already highly recognizable and visible. But our president, Anna Marie Kause, is a lesbian. And we also have a bunch of other faculty and staff that make known within their curriculum, within their instruction, within their leadership on campus, that they are queer, trans-identified. So there really is, as Jace was saying, LGBTQ leadership and folks that are visible in that at all levels of the institution. And I will pass it off to Jace to explain and expand a little bit more.
Yes, as I was saying earlier about RSOs and student government, because of the ability to be in RSOs and be in RSOs that are specifically targeted at queer people, it gives a really good space for students to be able to build their leadership skills in an area of their life and build their confidence around their identity before moving on to other groups and other RSOs and really taking charge within those areas, and not standing anyone's homophobia and transphobia, and also having people behind them to be able to back them up as well. I know for a fact that the community and the interconnectedness of it has really helped me in developing my leadership skills as an active out student leader on campus, just because in my freshman year I joined Delta Phi, which is the queer fraternity on campus, and because of my interactions with that and knowing people from that, I was able to be aware of any hirings going on at the Q Center, And then once I came to the Q Center, I was able to like further expand my leadership opportunities and how to like bolster the leadership of other queer people in my community. As I was saying, as Val was mentioning earlier about the ASU Dub, which is the student government here on campus, a lot of the leadership within there is queer as well. And like there is different ways of being out, because sometimes you're out to your community but not out to the general like population. But there is a lot of like solidarity that comes with seeing queer leaders and knowing queer leaders and being like, I can be that, and I can make my place on campus, and I can make the campus how I need it to be. Yeah, other RSOs being like UPOCA, which Val talked about earlier, which is the Queer People of Color Alliance, Gal Pals, which is the an RSO for queer and trans women and non-binary people, and there are plenty like queer student, like graduate student RSOs that are focused around like what it means to be a queer professional, and what it means to be, what it means to use your position in order to like grow in your field or like get connected to networks in your field. We also have like a lot of leadership development here at the Q Center, including like recently one of our staff, Natai, has been releasing leadership development newsletters every other week, which contain things like articles about like what it means to be professional, and challenging what it means to be professional as a person who doesn't fit within like a gender binary. There's information in there about volunteering opportunities, job opportunities, and just like training opportunities that, because we're online and because a lot of information goes around like via word of mouth, it would be very hard otherwise to just get all that information in one package. So there is like a lot of work that the Q Center is doing in order to like connect people to these leadership opportunities. Yeah.
Really cool. So if an LGBTQ plus student has an issue of harassment inside or outside the classroom, how will it get remedied or handled?
Yeah, I can speak to this. There's lots of ways to report and start investigations, or even just seek support if that's not necessarily the route that a student wants to go in. But that's kind of what the role of the Q Center is to be that like liaison and connector space for students to reach out to other campus entities or organizations on campus or external to campus, depending on what their needs are. But we have Q Center advising, drop-in advising with professional staff and graduate students. So depending on what the issue is, a student can schedule an advising session with any one of us, and talk either to a peer and just get some like peer support and maybe some other guidance from that level, or talk to one of our advisors, or T and I offer advising, T being the director, offer drop-in advising as well. And so we can take that kind of to the institutional level if it needs to be escalated and things need to be addressed differently. We also have the bias reporting tool. That's kind of an online form that students, faculty, staff, community members, anytime they're engaging with university affiliated or hosted programs, events, anything like that, even like classroom incidences can be reported into that tool. And then there is a committee that reviews all of the submissions into that, and either like launches investigations, follows up with the community member for like how they want that to be addressed, that kind of thing. So that's one avenue to explore. There's also student legal services we work with closely. Some students that might have like, if they live off campus and don't live on campus, but in their own like housing and apartments, and they're having issues with a landlord, and they're facing maybe like discrimination, or they think it's discrimination based on their identities, they could go to student legal services and get free consultation about that. The unfortunate thing kind of with student legal services is there is a conflict of interest if the student has a grievance against the university or like a faculty member, because the student legal services has to also represent the University of Washington. So another avenue that they could explore if that is the case is the Lavender Rights Project, which is a community organization run for and by queer and trans lawyers and legal scholars, and Q Law, which is a Washington overall state organization that provides advocacy and legal resources to queer and trans folks. and then if there's other issues in like employment or more issues with compliance, or like say a faculty member or instructor is not honoring someone's pronouns or names and they keep misgendering them in a classroom, that community member or student that's being impacted can reach out to human resources or the ombuds office to seek additional areas of either accountability or investigation in ways that are both confidential or more public known. There's also the Title IX office for gender-based violence and discrimination. The University of Washington on our campus, we interpret Title IX guidance using more of an expansive gender identity perspective and approach. And it, even though the definition is, or within the policy itself is sex-based, we like address and look into through the Title IX office gender-based violence and any kind of sexual assault or sexual misconduct that happens interpersonally. And then also housing and food services and res life if there's conflicts that arise within the dorms and in resident life communities. So there's like a lot of avenues, a lot of areas to get support and for students and community members to report out anything. But also it's a matter of like connecting folks to those resources. Because if you're new on campus, maybe first generation, an international student, or just like new to higher ed in general, or like this campus specifically, you don't really know where to get those resources. So I would recommend that folks kind of come to the Q Center as a one-stop hub where we can like tell you which route to go in. But there is a lot of avenues to explore and multiple ways that students can seek some guidance and further their advocacy at the UW.
Really good answer. So how is your campus supporting LGBTQ plus students across their varying intersections of identities?
Well, one of the ways that the Q Center helps to connect people to leadership and mentorship as they need it is we very much try to center like queer and trans, Black, Indigenous people of color within our spaces, like queer mentorship program, which connects like students to students or students to alumni or students to faculty in order to help them either get help around like the intersections of their identity, give them guidance on like how they should proceed as like a queer trans person in the professional realm or within academics. There is a lot of like, the Q Center does focus a lot on like centering the experiences of queer people of color, just because like within like that's not something that we usually see within queer community spaces is like centering of queer people of color. So we need to like make that change. But yeah, so within a lot of the events that we do, we try to hire like queer artists of color, queer performers of color for a lot of our like big events during the year, such as Lavender graduation and the welcome luncheon. And we also are working on making a trans woman of color and femme cohort, which is like a discussion group for our space in order to tackle that like lack of institutional support for trans women of color here on campus. So those are some of the like major things that the Q Center is doing.
Yeah, and to expand a little bit more on that, something that I've personally been trying to integrate more into my practice and also just like in shifting the culture of the Q Center as well in recent years is thinking about accessibility and disability from equity lens and thinking about how at every level and not just like targeting and recruiting and trying to identify like queer and trans, disabled, sick, chronically ill, mad, all of the terms folks to like bring into the space or bring into our programming, but thinking about how can we make like our social media posts and Instagram posts accessible? How can we integrate like image descriptions, and make sure that our language is screen reader friendly, and thinking about accessibility as a philosophy and an ethic and like a politic as well. And not just how, like, what types of bodies and what types of people do we have in our space and who are we recruiting, but also just like making sure that any of our content and information is even accessible, and can be widely shared and engage any like audience and meets them where they're at with different assistive tech that they might need, and thinking about that also programmatically, like expanding what kind of services we're able to offer with multilingual interpreters, hopefully ASL interpreters, CART services, that kind of thing. Trying to strengthen our relationship with the D Center, which is the Deaf and Disability Culture Center on campus, learning more about the DRS system, because we know queer and trans students many times often are disabled, chronically ill, deaf, sick. They might not disclose that, it might not be visible to us, but they exist within our community, and this is an intersection of our community. So thinking about that, something that I am really excited and proud of is like in our collaborative process of redesigning the Q Center, we really attended to like, what are the paint colors that would feel really supportive for our neurodivergent student population, and finding colors that aren't super like intense and would feel like really welcoming for them. So that's a way that we brought in accessibility and thinking about from a disability justice lens, incorporating that into our work, even if it is not the most obvious way to go about that work. And then other things, thinking about reproductive justice, as I mentioned before, and expanding it and changing our language, changing the ways that folks on our university think about menstruation and bleeding, what types of bodies bleed, what types of bodies can or cannot have babies, that kind of thing. So we're challenging ideas of the binary and biological essentialism there, and trying to get resources and education out to as many folks as we can. And then at all levels, trying to be as anti-oppressive or to work in anti-oppressive ways as possible. So trying to combat and attempting, succeeding, who's to say, but we're making attempts at combating like all of the isms: racism, classism, elitism, urbanism versus like, what's the term? Metronormativity. We do exist in a city and an urban space, but we do know like our community and student populations often come from not those types of spaces as well. And so really thinking about those things deeply and how we can create programs and education and learning opportunities and leadership opportunities to include those experiences as well, because it makes our community that much richer, knowing that those experiences exist within it.
Really good answer. So social justice, equality, and equity are constant journeys of progress. So what's on the agenda for your campus to improve within the next 2 to 3 years?
Wow. Great question. Okay, so this is really been the visioning project for new leadership. So a little bit more context: the Q Center went under a dual hiring process basically in the 2019-2020 academic year. So there was a big hiring search, and then a dual hiring process, and Dr. Tatsi Nico, the director, and myself as associate director were hired in the fall of 2020. So we've basically been in these roles for about 6 months now, and that is like what a good portion of our work has been, is strategic planning, visioning for the next 2 or 3 years. Things that we're doing is restructuring the Q Center and reshaping our culture internally. What this restructure kind of has looked like is creating 3 different hubs within our work. So the leadership hub, we've talked a little bit about, facilitating professional development, queering the idea of respectability politics, professional development, using queer as a politic and a philosophy ideology of moving through the world and disrupting things and being subversive to like cis hetero normativity. And then our like research or learning hub, doing education and training, trying to make education and trainings as accessible as we can, not just limiting that to curriculum development and workshops, but also like expanding out knowledge and consciousness raising across social media and different platforms, and integrating that in different ways, as well as strengthening relationships with on-campus orgs and off-campus organizations. And then we have the Programs Hub. Some things that are coming from that are new are the Trans Women and Femme of Color cohort, as Jace talked about, and like addressing issues of retention, particularly for that demographic of our community. Trans women and femmes of color have not really succeeded or thrived on our campus in the past. We have definitely had students that have existed or been affiliated with the Q Center community, but because of the lack of institutional support and just like so many barriers and forces that impact their ability to thrive or feel like they can survive sustainably, folks have not reached degree completion. So we're trying to create a cohort and a sustainable and safer space for trans women and femmes of color, and for them to see themselves reflective in different forms of leadership, and to be supported throughout their 4 years, 6 years if they go to grad school, that kind of thing, and address retention issues in that area. And then continuing with just like our staple programs like Queer Mentorship Program, and building that out to create more multi-generational opportunities for elders and gabies, young queer folks to like connect and like learn shared history and things like that. And we're also like very excited about developing more of our academic arm and doing courses that are guided and created and also part of that looks like doing a study abroad where we can take students and have students learn about queer and trans identities outside of the Western and like North American context. So that's very exciting, and hopefully that gets off the ground in the next couple of years. We have to submit proposals in the fall and everything, but study abroad is definitely a big area of growth that I'm excited to explore. And really just cultivating a more expansive community and really elevating and centering QD BIPOC in the years to come. Yeah.
Really good answer. So how would you both describe your campus to a prospective LGBTQ+ student in 3 words?
I'll say interconnected, value of the second one.
Defiant and fierce. You go,
And then,
Jace.
wait, was that 1 or 2?
I'm gonna say it's 1.
Okay, expansive.
Cool, there we go.
Really cool. So please share for those watching on your website to learn more about LGBTQ+ life on your campus. Again, thank you both so much. Campus Pride appreciates your hard work and continued efforts to create an inclusive space for LGBTQ+ students to learn, live, grow, and thrive at the University of Washington. Your work makes a positive difference in so many lives, and thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching the Campus Pride Spotlight series. If you wish to learn more about this campus or any other college or university, you can search for free at the Campus Pride Index online at campusprideindex.org. That's campusprideindex.org. For over 400+ colleges and universities that have come out as LGBTQ+ friendly. Again, my name is Ayla, and thank you so much for watching.